They mocked Earth's lone vessel until the human commander gave the order. The stars had never looked so cold to Ambassador Yellen as they did through the viewport of the UE's Perseverance. And she could feel the weight of humanity's future pressing down on her shoulders like a mountain made of ice and iron. Commander Elena Vasquez stood beside her, hands clasped behind her back, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace with eyes that had seen too much war and too little peace. "We arrive in 3 minutes," Vasquez said, her voice calm and steady like a river that knows exactly where it flows. Island nodded and tried to swallow. The fear that sat in her throat like a stone. She had read the intelligence reports, and she knew what waited for them at the Vathari disputed zone. Hundreds of warships from a dozen alien species, each one more powerful than anything Earth had ever built. Each one crewed by beings who saw humanity as nothing more than insects crawling out of the mud. The Perseverance was a frigate, small and sleek and alone, and Yellen could not help but wonder if they were flying to their deaths. "Commander," she said quietly, "do you truly believe we have a chance at these negotiations?" Vasquez turned her head slightly, and Yellen saw something in those dark eyes that she could not name, something ancient and patient and terribly dangerous. "I believe," the commander said, "that the galaxy has never met anything like us. And that is either our greatest strength or our final weakness." Before Yellen could respond, the ship shuddered, and the colors outside the viewport collapsed into points of light. And they were there. The Vathari disputed zone stretched before them like an ocean of darkness filled with metal and filings. Breath caught in her chest as she saw the fleet's massive Ketvari dreadnoughts covered in weapons that could crack planets. Crystalline Arzelian world ships that glowed with inner light like frozen stars. Biomechanical leviathans of the Moric Dominion that looked less like ships and more like nightmares given form and hunger. And there, in the middle of it all, was the diplomatic station where the Galactic Assembly met to decide the fate of worlds and species. The Perseverance moved forward, a single spark of human defiance in an ocean of alien power. "Commander," the communications officer called out, "we are receiving transmissions on all frequencies. Put them through," Vasquez ordered. The bridge filled with sound, laughter, mocking and cruel, echoing from 100 different ships in 100 different languages that the translation systems converted into words that cut like knives. "Is that their warship or their escape pod?" One voice said, "Perhaps the humans got lost on the way to their extinction." Another laughed, "How precious. They sent their best." "And their best is a toy." Yellen felt her face burn with shame and anger, but Vasquez remained perfectly still. Her expression as blank as fresh snow. The main view screen flickered, and a face appeared. Admiral Tovaks Kethsai of the Kethvari Grand Fleet. His scaled features twisted into a smile that showed far too many teeth. "Welcome, humans," he said, his voice dripping with contempt like poison from a wound. "We are so pleased you accepted our invitation to witness the proceedings. We accepted your invitation to participate," Yellen said, stepping forward. "Earth is a member of this assembly now, and we expect to be treated as such." Torvax laughed, and his laugh was the sound of a predator playing with food it has already caught. Of course," he said, waving a clawed hand dismissively. "You may speak if you wish, though I doubt anyone will listen. And I suggest you park your—" He paused and looked at the Perseverance with theatrical confusion. "Your quaint little shuttle behind the supply vessels where it will be safe." More laughter erupted from the alien fleets, a wave of mockery that crashed against the Perseverance's hull. Yellen opened her mouth to respond, but Vasquez placed a hand on her arm, gentle but firm, a warning and a promise wrapped in human touch. "Thank you for your concern, Admiral," Vasquez said, and her voice carried no anger, no fear. "Nothing at all but calm certainty. We will take position as appropriate. Torvax's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he had expected more resistance and was disappointed by the lack of it. "See that you do," he said. And the screen went dark. The bridge was silent for a long moment. And then the navigation officer spoke. "Commander, shall I take us to the rear of the formation?" "No," Vasquez said. "Take us to the center." Directly beside the Admiral's flagship, the officer hesitated, and Yellen stared at the commander in disbelief. "Commander, that will be seen as a provocation. It will be seen as exactly what it is," Vasquez interrupted. And now there was steel in her voice, cold and sharp and utterly unbreakable. "We are not supply ships, and we are not servants, and we will not be pushed to the back of the room like children who do not belong at the adults' table." She turned to face the viewport, watching as the alien dreadnoughts loomed larger and larger. Humanity clawed its way out of the mud and through 10,000 years of blood and fire to reach these stars. She said quietly, "And I will not dishonor every ancestor who died to get us here by hiding behind cargo containers." Yellen felt something shift in her chest. The fear was still there, but now it was joined by something else. Something that felt like the first spark of fire in a cold and empty darkness. The Perseverance moved forward, small and alone and utterly unafraid, and took its place among giants who'd already begun to sharpen their knives. And Commander Elena Vasquez watched them all with eyes that held secrets they could not imagine, and waited for them to make their first mistake. They mocked Earth's lone vessel until the human commander gave the order. The assembly chamber was a cathedral of arrogance, built to remind smaller species of their place in the galactic order. And Ambassador Yellen felt that reminder with every step she took across its polished floors. Towering columns of alien crystal stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadow, and floating platforms carried delegates from a dozen different worlds, each one positioned according to their species' power and importance. Earth's platform was the smallest and the lowest, barely above the floor, while the Kethvari delegation floated near the ceiling like gods looking down on ants island, stood at the front of humanity's tiny delegation, her hands steady even though her heart was racing. And she listened as the true purpose of this gathering was revealed. "The matter before the assembly is simple," Admiral Torvax announced from his elevated position, his voice echoing through the chamber like thunder. "The protected development zone around the Sol system expires in 30 standard cycles, and we must decide how to divide the resources fairly among civilized species." Yellen felt ice spread through her veins as a holographic map appeared in the center of the chamber Earth's solar system, carved into pieces like meat on a butcher's table. "The Morok Dominion claims the third planet as a biological reserve," Torvax continued, gesturing toward the nightmare shapes of the Morok delegation. "Its native species will be preserved and studied in controlled environments." A biological reserve. Yellen understood what that meant, and the understanding made her sick with horror. They wanted to turn Earth into a farm, humans into livestock to be bred and studied and harvested for whatever secrets their bodies held. "The Kethvari Grand Fleet claims the asteroid belt and the fourth planet for mineral extraction," Torvax said, his teeth gleaming in the chamber's cold light. "And the Arzelian Collective will harvest the gas giants for energy production." Yellen looked around the chamber and saw no sympathy in any alien face, only hunger and greed and the absolute certainty that humans had no power to stop any of this. "Does the human delegation wish to comment before the vote?" Torvax asked, and the question was thick with mockery. An invitation to beg that was designed to humiliate rather than help. Island stepped forward, and her voice was stronger than she expected when she spoke. "The human delegation rejects this partition in its entirety," she said. "Earth is not territory to be divided, and humanity is not a resource to be harvested. And we will not accept any outcome that treats us as less than equals in this assembly." Silence fell across the chamber. Not the silence of respect, but the silence of predators who cannot quite believe their prey has shown its teeth. And then the laughter began. It started with the HFY, their harsh barking sounds filling the air, and it spread to the other delegations until the entire assembly was shaking with cruel amusement. Rejects? Torvax said, wiping tears of mirth from his scaled face. And what, precisely, does humanity intend to do about it? Fight us with that single ship you brought? If necessary, a new voice said. And every head in the chamber turned toward the small communication screen that had flickered to life on Earth's platform. Commander Vasquez looked out at the assembled powers of the galaxy, her face calm and her eyes steady, and she spoke 4 words that silenced every laugh. We will defend ourselves. Torvax's amusement faded into something colder and harder, and Yellen saw real anger flash across his features, the anger of a being who was not accustomed to defiance from those he considered beneath him. You threaten us? He said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. One primitive ship against the combined might of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. I am stating a fact, Vasquez replied. Earth will not submit to partition, and any attempt to take our world by force will be met with resistance. The chamber buzzed with shocked whispers, and Yellen saw the Arzelian delegates exchange glowing patterns of light. That might have been concern or confusion, but Torvax was not confused. He was furious. This assembly does not negotiate with primitives who do not understand their place, he snarled. And I will not allow human arrogance to delay these proceedings. He turned to address the chamber at large, his voice rising to fill every corner. I move that we teach these humans a lesson that will echo across the galaxy for 1,000 years. Let every young species see what happens when insects challenge gods. A chorus of approval rose from the delegations, hungry and eager, and Yellen felt her hope crumbling like sandcastles before the tide. The human vessel has 1 hour to accept the partition, Torvax declared. And if they refuse, we will demonstrate why the HFY have ruled these stars for 10,000 generations. The screen went dark, and Yellen stood alone on humanity's tiny platform as the alien delegations dispersed to their ships. Eager to watch the execution of human pride, she took a shuttle back to the Perseverance, and when she stepped onto the bridge, she found Vasquez exactly where she had left her, standing at the viewport, hands clasped behind her back, watching the alien armada move into attack formation around their lone ship. Commander, Yellen said, and her voice was shaking now. They are going to destroy us. They are going to try. Vasquez said, we cannot fight them. We have 1 ship against hundreds. We have no allies. We have nothing. Vasquez turned, and Yellen saw that strange light in her eyes again, ancient and patient and terrifying. Ambassador, she said quietly, do you know what makes humanity different from every other species in this galaxy? Yellen shook her head. They reached the stars because they cooperated, Vasquez said. They built empires because they agreed on common goals. They achieved greatness because they worked together. She turned back to the viewport, watching the HFY dreadnoughts lock their weapons onto the Perseverance. We reached the stars because we could not stop killing each other long enough to fail. We built empires from the ashes of other empires, and we achieved greatness by climbing over mountains of our own dead. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, like a mother explaining something terrible to a child who was too young to understand. They see 1 ship and think us weak, but they do not understand what 1 ship means when that ship is crewed by a species that spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war against itself. Alarms began to sound as the alien fleet completed its formation, and Yellen watched the tactical display fill with red icons, weapons locked, shields charging, death approaching from every direction. What are you going to do? She whispered. Commander Elena Vasquez smiled. And it was the smile of something that had been waiting a very long time to show its true face. "I'm going to give them exactly what they asked for," she said. "A lesson that will echo across the galaxy for 1,000 years." They mocked Earth's lone vessel until the human commander gave the order. Countdown filled the Perseverance's bridge with a quiet terror that seemed to seep into the bones of every crew member who watched the numbers fall. 59 minutes had passed since Admiral Torvax issued his ultimatum, and the alien armada had spent every second of that time positioning itself for the kill. 300 warships formed a sphere of death around the lone human vessel, their weapons hot and hungry, their crews eager to witness the destruction of human arrogance. Lieutenant Chen worked at the tactical station, her fingers flying across holographic controls as she tracked every enemy ship, every weapon log, every threat vector that promised annihilation. 30 seconds. "Commander," she reported, and her voice was steady, even though her hands trembled. Vasquez stood at the center of the bridge like a statue, carved from determination and ice, her eyes fixed on the main view screen where Admiral Torvax's flagship loomed like a mountain of metal and malice. The bridge crew watched her, waiting for orders, waiting for some sign of what would happen next, waiting for anything that might transform this moment from an execution into something else. Ambassador Yellen stood near the back, her diplomatic credentials suddenly worthless in a universe that had decided to solve this problem with weapons instead of words. 20 seconds. Chun said. The communications console chirped, and the officer at that station looked up with wide eyes. "Commander, we are receiving a broadcast request from Admiral Torvax. He wants to offer us one final chance to surrender. Open the channel." Vasquez said. Torvax's face appeared on the screen, his scales gleaming with satisfaction, his teeth bared in a smile that held no warmth or mercy. "Human commander," he said, savoring each word like fine wine, "I am a generous being, and I will give you this one last opportunity to accept reality. Surrender now, and your crew will be permitted to live as servants in Cathvari households, which is more than your species deserves." The bridge was silent, and Yellen felt tears burning in her eyes, tears of rage and grief and the crushing weight of helplessness. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft and calm and carried across the channel like the whisper of wind before a hurricane. "You measured us by the size of our fleet," she said, "and you should have measured us by the wars we survived to build it." Torvax's smile flickered, confused by words that did not sound like surrender. "You see one ship," Vasquez continued, "because one ship is all we needed to send." 10 seconds, Chun said quietly. "Admiral Torvax," Vasquez said. And now there was something new in her voice, something cold and ancient and utterly without fear. "You have made a mistake." She turned away from the screen, dismissing the most powerful warlord in the galaxy like he was nothing more than a minor annoyance, and faced her crew. "Activate the Lazarus Protocol," she ordered. "Show them what humanity brought to the negotiating table." For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the Perseverance began to transform. Panels along the hull slid open with mechanical precision, revealing compartments that the alien sensors had dismissed as cargo holds or crew quarters. But they were not cargo holds. They were nurseries. Thousands of objects poured from the Perseverance's hidden chambers, each one small enough to fit in a human hand, each one glowing with the soft blue light of active systems coming online. They spread outward in perfect geometric patterns, forming shapes that seemed impossible, moving with coordination that spoke of intelligence rather than simple programming. "What is this?" Torvax demanded, his voice suddenly uncertain. "What are those things?" Vasquez turned back to the screen, and her smile was the most terrifying thing Yellen had ever seen. "Those," she said, "are our children." The alien sensors finally registered what they were seeing. and panic erupted across the fleet's communication channels. Autonomous combat platforms, thousands of them. They are networking. They are thinking, how did they fit so many inside one ship? This is impossible. This technology does not exist. But it did exist. Because humanity had built it in the darkness between stars, in secret shipyards hidden from alien eyes. Developed by engineers and scientists who understood that the universe was not kind to species that could not defend themselves. Each drone was small, but each drone was lethal. Each drone was connected to every other drone, forming a single vast intelligence that thought with the speed of light and struck with the precision of a scalpel. Each drone was programmed with 10,000 years of human military history. Every tactic, every strategy, every brutal lesson that humanity had learned in the endless wars it had fought against itself. The swarm numbered 40,000 by the time the last drone emerged from the Perseverance's hull, and the blue glow of their combined presence turned the darkness of space into something that looked almost like dawn. You wanted to know what humanity would do, Vasquez said, her voice carrying to every ship in the alien fleet. You wanted to understand how one primitive vessel could threaten the great powers of the galaxy. She gestured to the swarm that surrounded her ship like a halo of destruction waiting to be unleashed. Here is your answer. Torvax's face had gone pale, his scales losing their color as the reality of what he was seeing crashed against the certainty of his assumptions. This changes nothing, he said. But his voice shook with doubt. You have more weapons. But you are still outnumbered, still outgunned, still facing forces that have conquered species far greater than yours. Then give the order, Vasquez said. Fire on us and discover what happens when you corner something that evolved by fighting everything, including itself. The fleet hesitated. And in that hesitation, Yellen saw something she had never expected to see in alien eyes. Fear. Great powers of the galaxy looked upon humanity's true face. And for the first time in 10,000 years, they were afraid. Commander, Chun said, her voice filled with something that might have been awe or terror. All drones are online and awaiting instructions, Vasquez nodded, her eyes never leaving Torvax's pale face. Admiral, she said, the next move is yours. Choose wisely. Because humanity has waited a very long time for someone to give us a reason to show the galaxy what we really are. The countdown had ended. And now the universe held its breath, and Commander Elena Vasquez stood at the center of everything, patient and calm and absolutely ready to do whatever was necessary to ensure that humanity would never again be called primitive by anyone. They mocked Earth's lone vessel until the human commander gave the order. Admiral Torvax made his choice in the way that proud beings always do when their pride has been wounded. He chose violence. All ships, open fire. He roared, and 300 alien warships unleashed their weapons upon the Perseverance, and its swarm of waiting children. Space itself seemed to crack under the fury of that assault, as plasma beams and kinetic rounds and exotic energy weapons designed to shatter worlds converged on the lone human vessel. But the swarm was already moving. The drones scattered like a flock of birds startled by a predator. Except these birds were predators themselves, and they did not flee from danger. They embraced it. They moved with impossible speed and perfect coordination, dancing between weapons fire that should have destroyed them, slipping through gaps in the enemy's attack patterns that no organic crew could have seen or exploited. And then they struck back. The first Kefvari cruiser died, without even understanding what had killed it. One moment, its shields were holding strong against the expected human counterattack, and the next moment a dozen drones had identified the exact frequency needed to slip through those shields and had burrowed into the ship's reactor core. The explosion lit up the darkness like a new sun, and the screams of the dying crew echoed across every open channel. What is happening? Torvax demanded, watching as a second cruiser went dark, its systems infected by drones that had abandoned destruction in favor of infiltration. "They're not fighting like any species we have encountered," his tactical officer reported, her voice shaking with terror. "They are targeting life support systems, ammunition stores, command centers. They are attacking everything except our weapons." She was right. And that was what made it so horrifying. The human drones were not trying to win a battle. They were trying to create chaos. They bypassed the enemy's strongest defenses and struck at the weakest points, the places that no honorable warrior would ever target, the systems that everyone assumed were safe, because only monsters would destroy life support before weapons. But humanity had never claimed to be honorable in war. Humanity had learned long ago that honor was a luxury that losing sides could not afford. And so they had abandoned it in favor of efficiency. The Mork Leviathans tried to adapt their biomechanical systems, shifting and changing to counter the drone assault. But the swarm learned faster than they could evolve. Every tactic the aliens used was analyzed by the networked intelligence and countered within seconds. Shields were bypassed. Armor was pierced. Weapons were turned against their own ships. A Mork flagship tried to ram the Perseverance, its massive bulk hurtling through space like a living missile. But the drones saw it coming and transformed the beast's own momentum into its destruction. They latched onto its hull and injected feedback loops into its nervous system. And the Leviathan convulsed and screamed and crashed into two Kethvari dreadnoughts instead of its intended target. "Broadcast the deaths," Vasquez ordered quietly, and the communications officer hesitated for only a moment before obeying across every frequency. The alien fleet heard the sounds of their comrades' dying screams in a dozen languages, pleas for mercy that went unanswered. The terrible silence of ships that had been alive one moment and empty the next. It was psychological warfare on a scale the galaxy had never experienced. And it broke something in the alien crews that no amount of training could have prepared them. Fourth Arzelian world ships were the first to flee, their crystalline hulls flashing with patterns of pure terror as they calculated odds that had shifted from absolute victory to absolute defeat in less than 5 minutes. Morek followed, their surviving Leviathans screaming retreat signals that echoed with pain and fear. The Dekethvari were too proud to run, and Admiral Torvax was the proudest of them all. All remaining ships, concentrate fire on the human command vessel. He ordered, kill their leader and the drones will fall. It was a reasonable assumption. Most species were like that, dependent on their commanders, lost without direction from above. But humanity was not most species. The drones did not need Vasquez to tell them what to do. They were semi-sentient, capable of independent action, programmed with 10,000 years of human military doctrine that told them exactly how to respond to every situation, and they responded to Torvax's order with brutal creativity. A single drone broke away from the swarm and accelerated toward the Kethvari flagship. Not attacking, not destroying, just flying. The flagship's defenses tracked it and prepared to fire. But the drone was not trying to breach the hull. It was trying to deliver a message. It slipped through a maintenance hatch that the Kethvari had never thought to shield, and made its way through the ship's corridors, past panicking crew members who fired weapons that could not touch it, past security systems that could not stop something so small and so determined. And then it reached the Bridget. Torvax watched in frozen horror as the tiny machine floated through the door and stopped directly in front of his command chair. A hologram flickered to life, and Commander Vasquez's face appeared, calm and patient and utterly without mercy. "We learned to split the atom before we learned to feed our children," she said, and her voice was soft like the whisper of death. "We cracked our own genome while we were still burning fossil fuels. We created artificial minds while we were still debating whether all humans deserved rights. Torvax could not move, could not speak, could only listen as the human commander explained what he had awakened. We are not a species that evolved for peace. Admiral, we evolved despite ourselves, constantly fighting, constantly dying, constantly finding new ways to kill each other more efficiently. The hologram leaned closer, and Torvax saw something in those human eyes that he had never seen before in any species, a darkness that went all the way down, a capacity for violence that made his own warlike culture seem like children playing with toys. And now you have seen what we chose not to become, Vasquez said. We could have been monsters, Admiral. We could have spread across this galaxy like a plague of fire and death. And no one could have stopped us, she smiled. And it was the saddest smile Torvax had ever seen. But we chose to be better. And we came here hoping to find others who had made the same choice. The hologram flickered and died, and the drone floated silently, waiting around the flagship. The battle had ended not because the humans had destroyed the alien fleet, but because the alien fleet had simply stopped fighting ships drifted without power. Their crews too shocked or too terrified to continue. And in the center of it all, the Perseverance remained untouched. Its swarm of children returning to their mother like obedient soldiers who had completed their mission. The most powerful armada the galaxy had ever assembled had been broken in 11 minutes by a single human ship, and Admiral Torvax finally understood why humanity had taken so long to reach the stars. They had spent all that time learning to control the monsters that lived inside. Damn, he was grateful in that moment that they had succeeded. They mocked Earth's lone vessel until the human commander gave the order. The Galactic Assembly reconvened 3 days after the battle. And this time, the arrangement of the chamber was very different. Earth's platform no longer sat at the lowest level. Forgotten and dismissed, it now floated at the center of the chamber, level with the greatest powers of the galaxy. And no one laughed when Ambassador Yellen took her place upon it. The holographic map of Earth's solar system appeared once again. But the partition lines that had carved it into pieces were gone, erased by the blood and fire and fear that humanity had brought to the negotiating table. Admiral Torvax was not present. He had resigned his command and retreated to his homeworld, broken by the weight of what he had witnessed and what he had learned about himself. A younger Kethvari stood in his place, her scales pale with the lingering shock that had spread through her entire species since the battle. The Kethvari Grand Fleet withdraws all claims to human territory, she announced. And her voice was quiet but clear. And we petition this assembly to recognize Earth as a full member with all rights and protections that status provides. Similar announcements followed from every delegation that had participated in the partition vote. The Moric Dominion renounced any interest in human biology and offered formal apologies for suggesting that humanity could ever be treated as livestock. The Arzelian Collective proposed a technology exchange program that would have been unthinkable just days ago, when humans were considered too primitive to understand alien science one by one. The great powers of the galaxy acknowledged what everyone now understood. Humanity was not a child species taking its first steps into the stars, but something else entirely. Something ancient and terrible that had chosen to wear the mask of innocence until that mask was no longer useful. Island accepted each offer with grace and dignity, keeping her face carefully neutral, even as her heart sang with triumph and relief when the session ended. She returned to the Perseverance and found Commander Vasquez exactly where she had been throughout the negotiations on the bridge, watching the stars through the viewport with those dark and patient eyes. "It is done," Yellen said. "Earth is safe, and we have been given a seat at the table as equals." Vasquez nodded slowly, but there was no celebration in her expression, no joy at what they had accomplished. "Commander?" Yellen asked, "Is something wrong?" Vasquez was quiet for a long moment before she spoke. "I have spent my entire life preparing for war," she said. "I was born during the Third Pacific Conflict, and I learned to fight before. I learned to read. I saw my first battle when I was 16. And I have not stopped fighting since." She turned to face Yellen, and for the first time, the ambassador saw something vulnerable beneath the iron surface of the commander's soul. "I hoped," Vasquez said softly, "that when we finally reached the stars, we would find something different, civilizations that had moved beyond violence. Species that had learned to solve their problems without weapons." She gestured toward the viewport, where the alien fleets were dispersing, limping back to their homeworlds to repair their ships and their pride. "But they are just like us, bigger, older, more powerful, but just as afraid and just as willing to hurt others to protect themselves." Yellen understood, and she reached out to place a hand on the commander's arm. "Perhaps that is not a bad thing," she said. "Perhaps it means we can understand each other. Eventually, perhaps it means we are not as alone as we thought." Vasquez considered this, and slowly, something like hope flickered in her eyes. "Perhaps," she agreed. The Perseverance made the journey back to Earth in silence. But it was a comfortable silence now, the silence of soldiers who had completed their mission and could finally rest when they reached the Sol system. They found the real human fleet waiting for them, 700 warships that had never left home, each one carrying enough firepower to glass a planet, each one crewed by men and women who had been ready to die defending their world if the Perseverance had failed. Ellen stared at the fleet with wide eyes, understanding for the first time just how thoroughly humanity had fooled the galaxy. "This was always the plan," she breathed. "You sent one ship to make them underestimate us. We sent one ship to see if they were worthy of trust," Vasquez corrected. "And when they proved they were not, we showed them just enough to make them reconsider." She smiled. And this time, the smile was gentle, but we did not show them everything. Wise species never shows everything. 3 months later, the first Arzelian diplomatic vessel arrived at Earth, carrying ambassadors who wanted to learn more about the strange species that had humbled the galaxy with a single ship. They were met with warm welcomes and open arms, and no one mentioned the drones or the battle or the screams of dying aliens, echoing across every frequency. Humanity had made its point, and now it was time to build something better. In his memoirs, written years after the events at the Vathari Disputed Zone, the new Cathvari ambassador struggled to explain what his species had learned about humans. "We thought they were primitive because they came late to the stars," he wrote. "We did not understand that they were late because they spent so long learning to survive each other. When they finally looked up, they had already fought every war we could imagine, and many we could not." His final words on the subject became famous throughout the galaxy, quoted by historians and diplomats and military commanders who wanted to understand the species that had changed everything. "They chose to be kind," he wrote, "and we must never forget how terrifying that choice truly is, because it means they could have chosen otherwise. And if we ever force them to make that choice again, we may not survive the consequences on Earth." Commander Elena Vasquez retired from active service and spent her remaining years teaching young officers the lessons she had learned across a lifetime of war. Her final lecture, given to a class of cadets who would go on to serve as humanity's ambassadors to the galaxy, was recorded and preserved for future generations. "The universe is not kind," she told them, "and it will test you in ways you cannot imagine. It will offer you reasons to hate, reasons to fear, reasons to become the monsters that everyone expects you to be." She paused and looked at each young face, seeing in them the same potential for darkness and light that had always defined humanity. "Your job is to refuse those reasons," she said. "Your job is to be better than the universe expects you to be, because that is what it truly means to be human." She smiled one last time, and her eyes were full of something that might have been pride or hope or simply the peace of someone who had finally found the answer they had been searching. For all their lives, we reached the stars, not because we were the strongest or the smartest or the most ruthless, she said. We reached the stars because we learned to hold our darkness in one hand and our light in the other. And we chose again and again and again to let the light guide us. Never stop making that choice. And across the galaxy, species that had once mocked Earth's lone vessel began to learn what those words truly meant, and they were grateful. In the end, that humanity had chosen to teach them gently,